Ever struggled to force close a frozen app or share your screen for remote support? What if you could master essential macOS and Linux tools like a pro IT technician? In this video, I'll show you how to use Time Machine Local Snapshots, force close unresponsive apps, and share your screen seamlessly on macOS and Linux. Whether you're preparing for an IT certification or just want to optimize your workflow, these tips will save you time and make you a power user. Ready to unlock the full potential of macOS and Linux? Let's dive in. In this second part, we're going to look at some essential tools for using macOS and Linux. And we start with a rather barbaric term, which are local snapshots of Time Machine. As we saw in the previous course, on macOS you can make backups of your files and even go back to recover old versions of your files. But a problem may arise. That's because backups take up space, you may have configured Time Machine to perform them on a network location. Well, if you're using a laptop, you may not always be tethered to that drive. Well, that's where the local snapshot feature comes in, because it allows Time Machine to continue making backups, even when you don't have access to the backup disk. That is to say, that it will save a backup locally. This is what we call a local snapshots copy, and this recording will be done every hour to be kept for 24 hours. In fact, it's kind of a light version of the normal way Time Machine works. We will now see the different ways to restore backup images on these two operating systems. As a reminder, disk images are files that contain all the files: a hard drive, a USB flash drive, or a CD, and they are often used to make system backups. On the macOS side, it is possible to make backup images directly with the disk utility. To do this, simply click on Files, then New Image, and finally, Folder Image. A file with the extension .dmg will be created, and this is going to be this type of file, which will contain the disk image. To view the contents of this disk image, you have two options. Double-clicking on the .dmg file will mount the virtual disk directly on the desktop. That is to say that you will be able to open it in the same way as a physical disk. And if it is the image of a full disk, well, you can restore it with Disk Utility. Once you have selected the disk, you just need to click on Restore and choose the file in .dmg from your backup image. And on the Linux side, as you can probably imagine, the default solution will be the command prompt. But don't worry, because as always, I'd offer you an alternative solution with a GUI. As for the command line, we have the DD utility, which is probably the most used solution to make and restore disk images. It is found by default in all versions of Linux and allows creating disk or folder images, image restoration, and even file conversion and copying. I won't go into more detail about how to use it, because although it's a very complete and powerful solution, it's beyond the scope of this course. But for the certification, you should know that DD allows you to create disk images on Linux. And as promised, the utility, which allows you to do the same thing, but with a graphical interface, is the Clonezilla tool. Well, as you can see, this graphical interface is not the most beautiful because it launches from a terminal. But Clonezilla guides you a little more in creating and restoring disk images. It is therefore easier to use. Now, let's move on to the terminal, which is a very important tool, whatever the OS, and especially in support, configuration, or administration tasks. On macOS, you probably won't have the opportunity to launch the device often, because Apple prefers to make the user experience very easy. This terminal will therefore be used only for administrative tasks or the use of scripts. But more often than not, you will be able to manage everything from the graphical interface. And on the Linux side, unlike macOS, well, the terminal will probably be the place where you spend the most time. Because even if today a large number of Linux applications have a version with a graphical interface, well, it is with the terminal that you will always have the most possibilities. This is partly due to the fact that Linux is based on Unix, which is a very old operating system that began development in the 70s. Well, at that time, computers did not yet have a graphical interface and sometimes even displayed only text. So, it's completely understandable that using the command prompt can be scary, especially when you're coming from Windows or macOS. But you should know that if you are going to work on Linux systems, well, it is important to feel comfortable with the terminal. Now, we will see the screen sharing solutions that are very useful for technical support to users. On macOS, there is a built-in solution that allows this sharing. To activate it, go to System Settings and open the Sharing Configuration window. This is where you can enable screen sharing and change user permissions as needed. An interesting thing to note is that the screen sharing system in macOS is compatible with the VNC app. This means that you can share a Mac screen with a VNC running Windows or Linux. And on the Penguin side, well, you should know that there is the Remina tool, which is probably one of the best solutions on Linux for screen sharing. It is an application that can be installed on most distributions. The advantage is that it has a graphical interface and supports the following protocols: VNC, SSH, SFTP, and RDP, which makes it a very complete application. And before we finish this course, we're going to look at how to force an app to close if it won't respond anymore or stop. On macOS, to get started, you can click Force Quit by clicking on the apple or by using the Command Option plus ESC key combination. And then click on the application that you want to force close. And finally, on Linux, well, there are several ways to forcibly stop an application. We will look at two methods, one on the command line and one with the graphical interface. Let's start with the kill command that allows you to force a program to close. So, it is important to know that a program, when it runs on Linux, is provided with an identifier, which is called the process ID. It's a bit like the license plate of the application. Well, to leave a particular program, you need to know its process ID. The order will then be kill plus his process ID. To find the process ID of an application, you must use the command pso grep application name. To better understand, here is a small example with the Get It application, which is the equivalent of the Windows Notepad on Linux. The first order, pso disclosure grep get it, allows you to list the processes. The process ID is the first number of the line, in our case, 22860. So, if we want to suddenly close the application, get it? We just have to write kill 22860. For those who are still reluctant to use the terminal, the other way to force quit an application on Linux and use System Monitor or System Monitoring. Here, right-clicking on Remina allows us to choose the signal to send, and in our case, we want to send it a kill signal to complete the process.